experience at TAG with a young director who came in as a sort of junior associate called Leslie Finley. And Leslie said to me he wanted to go down to Theatre Centre to do some work, like a mini placement. And I said, yeah, on you go, sounds good to me. I mean, of course, we'd done plays by Theatre Centre at TAG. And Leslie came back and he was working on a new play by a writer, forgive me, I can't remember, but the play was called Keeper of the Keys. It was very dark, not an entirely successful play. But what Leslie did was he brought back with him a new methodology. Well, actually, it was quite an old methodology because the Theatre Centre had been doing it for years. But it was new to us at TAG because we hadn't really thought about the process of creating the play from the writer's point of view, which might sound like bleeding obvious. And it suddenly threw into relief a lot of issues where plays had not been working. And we had no chance of correcting them because you're in rehearsal, you're making the play, and you have no time. And the actors start to get nervous, and you start to get nervous, and you've got a school to go out and play. So Leslie brought back and he said, well, we're going to need two periods of R&D, research and development. To which we went, I was in charge at the time, I said, really? Do you need 2 periods of R&D? Is this not just kind of Theatre Centre overkill, ultra preciousness? And I thought, well, okay, Leslie, on you go. And of course, in itself, it's not a panacea because you can still, I believe you can, as people say, you can workshop a play to death and you can also make the same mistakes endlessly. But, so you need to know more than simply setting up a process in which the writing of the play can allow it to grow and develop, working with actors, working with the director, working with the designer maybe, working in all sorts of different ways, working with young people. But the importance of having a period of time to allow the play to grow, which is not just in the writer's head and in the writer's garret and then you're into production, where you think that what's on page will work, but you've had no chance to stand it up. And this is not just a read-through, this is a chance for actually targeting things that are where you feel there's a weakness. And of course this is what I mean, that you can endlessly make the same mistake if you don't know what it is you're looking for. But if you've already identified with the writer that there may be a weakness in the way in which a transition takes place, or that a certain character seems to have been neglected, or that the issue is not quite clear enough, those are things that you can focus on in the R&D. So it's a question of what you do in the R&D as well as having them. But the idea of having 2 R&Ds, which was so revolutionary at the time, in fact having one, I have to be absolutely honest to say, was quite revolutionary, in fact that you might actually give the play some space. And we didn't have it in our economy at that time. But from that day to this, I have never created a piece of work which did not contain some kind of preparatory process for the writer and also for the company as well, for both. And it's kind of may seem to be ABC, so forgive me if this is incredibly obvious to you, but I have to say that as a professional artistic director it wasn't obvious to me, nor was the value of it obvious. So that's my first story, so that's the first thing. The second thing I want to talk about, if it's okay, is what criteria did we use when I moved to the Unicorn to identify a good play, for example. We received uncommissioned scripts every day, and we would commission, and we would still ask the same questions. And I eventually codified these criteria with the help of our literary manager. So, here we go. The first one was, does the play contain a child's perspective? Might sound like a complete and obvious thing, and does it have to? Because none of these things, by the way, are meant to have simple answers. In fact, when one looks at the question, it just takes you deeper into the forest, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, what actually is a child's perspective? I mean, things we take for granted, like, it must have a child's perspective. What actually does that mean? Does that mean you have to have a child protagonist? Or more than one child protagonist, so that the audience can focus through that journey that young protagonist has? But then we know that, of course, young people are very excited by things which don't necessarily involve their direct experience. So having a child's perspective is kind of only just opens the door on that question of, well, how does the child get access to the material in the play, and what engages them emotionally, because that's what we're obviously interested in doing. But that was the first question. Does it even try and identify a child's perspective? The second one was, does it contain an element of poetry, by which you could be very crude about this and say, well, are we just talking about verse? Are we talking about rhythm? Are we talking about metre? Are we talking about those things which constitute poetry? It's a problematic term in itself. But in theatre, that's not what we meant. That might be an example of it, but it was more than that. It was just, how do we lift ourselves out of the everyday? If we're going to kind of offer a theatre experience of value, then we want to enrich the audience with something which goes beyond the bleeding obvious, something which goes beyond the soap opera, something which goes beyond the here and now, which takes us out of the prosaic and into the poetic. So it could be visual, or it could be using theatre art in a certain kind of way, but does the play allow that? Does it have the potential for that? And that leads me to the third one, which is one I always qualify. Well, I qualify all of them, but the third one is, does it have a sense of transcendence? Now, that's a difficult term, like religion is a difficult term, like spirituality is a difficult term, and they're ones I tend not to use because I'm very secular and very, I guess anti-mystical in some ways. It's my own personal makeup. I don't really subscribe to that way of looking at things, and yet, what do I mean by it? It is something that allows the potential to change, to go from here to there, so that the audience has gone on a journey somewhere. That is a type of transcendence. And of course a lot of plays don't. Oh yes, the fourth one was, who cares? Does it matter? Is it about anything? Again, you might think, well, it was interesting to the writer, but is it going to kind of meet our audience? Is it going to be of use to them? Is it going to be of interest to them? Is it something they care about? Is it something that we want them to care about? Is it something we want to bring to them because we're passionate about this thing that we're writing about? And that to me can be very, very wide-ranging, but it has to be about something. It's amazing how many plays aren't. They're not clear what it is that they are about, or they're not about something that is substantial. So the fourth question was, does it have a substantial element to it? And finally, and this might seem like the most bleeding obvious of all the criteria, and yet is often the one which is not present, and that is, does it contain a drama? Or does it contain a sense of drama? Now this is, some of those other criteria, of course, they are interconnected, like transcendence and drama to me are interconnected, because drama, by definition, must involve some form of change. However minimal that is, something has to have moved between the beginning and the end. So does the play contain the things which we understand by drama? So they are connected, they knock into each other, and clearly we would be bonkers if we'd said a play has to contain all those 5 ingredients. They're quite a useful checklist for saying, okay, when we built the Unicorn, I remember asking the Tower Bridge Primary School, these 8-year-olds, what they wanted from the building, and they said, why are you asking us? And I said, well, I'm trying to get some idea about what you think about should happen in your local theatre. And they said, but we don't know, we're only children. And I said, no, it's a theatre for children, so you really want your point of view. And they said, yeah, but why don't you ask the class next to us? We can't speak for them. I can't speak for my younger sister. I can't. And they suddenly raised a fundamental question of democracy, never mind a question of playwriting or theatre making, which was, just be wary. Just because you talk to a particular group might give you some insights, but it won't answer all your questions it won't satisfy you entirely, nor will it allay all your fears. But it might just take you a little step further, that's all. It might throw up some questions. So I'm nervous of the dogma, I'm nervous of the thing which says you have to go and talk to children, or you have to workshop a piece, or you have to. But on the other hand, it will invariably surprise you and throw up things which will provoke you into taking the process further. And that, of course, is not just legitimate, but actually almost a critical part of the process now. Where you do it, at which point you do it in the process, depends, I think, on the nature of the question you're trying to ask. Just to do it for the sake of it is pointless. That is just, box ticking. But to do it because you have an issue in the writing which needs unlocking, and maybe the kids will take you down a completely different road and say that's not the problem. The problem is that we didn't understand X, Y, or Z, or we're really engaged by that character, or we think that's breakfast, or that's funny, that's not funny. All those things which a group of children will bring to the process invariably seems to take us further down the road of getting a better piece of work. Won't answer all your problems, but it will be critical. So